some very fascinating testimony coming out yesterday, but it all started with a very technical legal discussion around family connections, Erin, where we believe that argument around the issue of the chair's brother, Advocate Mxolisi Zondo, has been parked for now. Where does McBride bring the chairperson's brother into his testimony?
Yes, very interesting that Mxolisi Zondo, the younger brother to Chairperson Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, was cited in McBride's papers in connection with the younger Zondo's findings in disciplinary processes relating to people involved with IPID and also Shadrach Sibiya. And so McBride names this younger Zondo brother and issues an opinion on his findings and says that he was part of a process that was undue around targeting and scapegoating individuals who were actually doing their jobs in fighting corruption. And when he mentioned the younger Zondo brother, he also mentioned Hogan Lovells and said Hogan Lovells, the law firm, was involved in these processes within IPID and other law enforcement agencies targeting people doing their work. So that's a submission, and that raises the question Zondo had to deliberate over yesterday on whether or not he has a conflict of interest in relation to this narrow aspect of McBride's testimony. And so the options were for Zondo to recuse himself altogether. Obviously, that didn't happen. The alternative was to recuse himself on that narrow issue of evidence, or to refer the matter back to the President, because the President, or in fact former President Jacob Zuma, instated the whole inquiry process. But because there is an issue of time here, they've really parked the issue for now, but obviously something of interest to the public, a potential conflict of interest for Zondo, and perhaps an ethical question about how closely he should be examining this evidence relating to his younger brother.
Now, it's being described as a narrow aspect of his testimony. I don't know if you can answer this, but did McBride agree that it is a narrow aspect and was dismissible and not that important whether they were brothers or not?
He didn't, and in fact this was raised by Advocate Paul Pretoria, Senior Counsel, when McBride was still sitting in the sort of benches for the legal counsel for parties involved with the Commission and also implicated persons and witnesses. So he was not sitting on the stand in a position to maybe raise disapproval or disagreement with this argument that it's really an ancillary issue to the Commission's work. But the point is that he has an opinion about the younger Zondo brothers' decision and his conduct, because what happened was, in relation to one of the colleagues of Robert McBride, a senior at IPID, this Advocate Mxolisi Zondo had found that during a disciplinary process he should be dismissed, and it was because this person from IPID was absent from a hearing. He'd provided a GP or general practitioner doctor's note, and Zondo had found that that was not admissible because it wasn't from a specialist. So a very technical issue, a kind of petty issue arguably, and McBride raising questions about this younger Zondo's conduct in relation to these disciplinary processes. So whether or not he agrees that it's an ancillary issue remains to be seen, but on the papers he obviously raises it because it's a concern for him. It's a concern both in terms of Zondo's conduct and Hogan Lovells and all of the machinations within IPID to, he argues, scapegoat people doing their jobs.
One wonders if Sunday lunch in the Zondo family is going to be a little bit more awkward this coming weekend. Now, McBride also testified in the so-called renditions case. What are his views there?
He says it was a conspiracy from the start. McBride saying that Anwar Dramat and Shadrach Sibiya were targeted again for doing their jobs, for working to bust corruption, and that it was politically motivated. He also said that the police minister drew on an incorrect report from IPID that had the fingerprints of criminal intelligence, a police division, in its recommendations for charges against Dramat and Sibiya. And we know, of course, that in October of last year, and in fact ENCA reported on it, those charges were provisionally dropped. But McBride saying from the get-go, from his arrival at IPID in 2014, he had concerns about this case and how exactly they found that Dramat and Sibiya were linked. For example, saying with Dramat, he was accused of involvement because he'd sent a congratulatory SMS to some of the authorities involved in removing these Zimbabwean suspects back to Zimbabwe. In the case of Sibiya, he was alleged to be at 3 of the sites involved in the rendition, so-called rendition. And yet cell phone records, both for his official cell phone and his private cell phone, did not place him at any of those 3 scenes. So McBride very doubtful that the so-called rendition case ever had any credit, and yet the police minister at the time recommended that both those officials be suspended from the Hawks for their alleged involvement.
Some very interesting information coming out around law enforcement agencies yesterday. Inquiry's legal team presenting an overview. Those numbers rather alarming.
Very alarming, and in fact we had a full organogram of all the different law enforcement agencies, and there Pretoria is asking if these agencies were in fact doing their work and using the resources from the state prudently, would this commission even exist? And the kind of inferred answer is no, But of course, big concerns, for example, him contrasting the findings and successes of the Scorpions with what followed with the SIU and the Hawks, the disparity in the number of cases opened, then prosecuted and successfully seen through to the end of their kind of process in the legal system. And so serious concerns, of course. We're going to hear more about that from McBride today when he continues his testimony. And importantly, this allegation about a so-called hit squad with operatives trained in China and Russia. I mean, the stuff gets so fantastical. It's hard to believe we're talking about democratic, post-transition South Africa. The stuff is very cloak and dagger. It's very
Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah, and very old South Africa too. The misappropriation of state funds to commit crimes, allegedly.
Gosh, I can't wait to watch that. Thank you so much, Erin Bates, our reporter, on top of things, as always, at the State Inquiry. As it continues today, we will go there live in a little while as well.